Greetings, Jim Hunt here. Just a moment before we start the show for some brief announcements. After recording this episode, we pinned down plans to hold our 2025 awards celebration at the Goodspeed Opera House on the banks of the beautiful Connecticut River in East Haddam on October 28th, 4 to 7 p.m. So I do hope you'll save the date for that because we'll be honoring all of our 2025 certified towns and a brand new cohort of climate leaders in a wonderful historic setting. The Goodspeed opened its doors as a professional musical theater in 1963. This exceptional venue has hosted over 250 musicals, including over 70 world premieres, and has exported 21 productions to Broadway. Yeah, and now they have us. Please do save the date to hit the high notes with us. Better yet, register early because, you guessed it, space is limited. Your hard work and continuing support are of vital importance to us. They really are. So we do hope to see you on October 28th. And of course, sponsorship opportunities are available for this event. Join us in working for a better Connecticut by sponsoring our 2025 award celebration. Don't wait. Contact Jessica LeClaire, 860-259-4767 to discuss options and details. And a word about this month's show, in which John Henry Burke, Sustainable CT Fellow Extraordinaire, takes over the big microphone to make some noise about noise pollution in Connecticut. The Sustainable CT Fellowship Program places highly qualified fellows across the state's councils of governments, or COGs, to help cities and towns become registered, certified, or recertified with Sustainable CT during the summer. Fellows also have the opportunity to work with one another on a group project addressing a statewide sustainability topic, like, well, noise pollution. Our Fellows program is generously sponsored by the Connecticut Green Bank, the Hampshire Foundation, Valley Community Foundation, the Community Foundation of Greater New Britain, the Northwest Connecticut Community Foundation, the Connecticut Community Foundation, and Chelsea Groton Foundation, and the Community Foundation of Middlesex County. That's a lot of foundation right there. Thank you, sponsors. It's also my opportunity to rope a fellow into hosting our show every summer, for their edification and enlightenment. John Henry didn't take too much convincing, thankfully. He's one of the shining stars in our fellows' firmament. He's been working this summer at the Northwest Hills Regional Council of Governments in Litchfield. Don't worry, I'll be back like a bad penny next month. In the meantime, thank you, John Henry, and enjoy the show.
People when you're an acoustician, we're a profession most people don't even know exists. I feel like it's my one opportunity to be in the limelight.
Welcome, everyone, to the August 2025 edition of The Impact, a Sustainable CT podcast for your edification, your enlightenment, and your entertainment, too. I'm John Henry Burke, a Sustainable CT Fellow working this summer with the Northwest Hills Council of Governments. I'm filling in this month for Jim Hunt, Sustainable CT's Communications Director. So if you're looking for someone to blame for this podcast, you can still blame him. But remember, this is never a one-way conversation. We always want to hear from you for our edification and enlightenment. Drop us a note, won't you, to info@sustainablecT.org. The Impact is brought to you in part by the Hampshire Foundation. The Hampshire Foundation funds partners who are finding pathways to rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions or help people build resilience against poverty and climate change. We are oh so glad they do. Visit them at hampshirefoundation.org. Remember, we can't do any of this without you. We don't have a magical rainbow unicorn money tree, no sir, but you can be a Sustainable CT sponsor. Find out how at sustainablect.org. All right, now let's get into the episode. Today, we are opening up our ears to the subject of noise pollution. We are very fortunate to have Amy Ziffer joining us today. Amy's worn many hats, including audio engineer, magazine editor, writer, photographer, landscape designer, and now acoustics consultant. She's got a master's degree in acoustics from RPI and works on many different sound-related projects as an acoustician. Amy, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time to chat with me today.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So let's just break it down to start with. Could you talk to us a little bit about, what is noise pollution and why is it a problem?
Sure. So in the broadest sense, noise pollution is any unwanted noise that is not a naturally occurring phenomenon. So we're talking about anthropogenic sounds produced by people and their activities that are loud, annoying, or disturbing of normal daily activities. Now, as a person who, by my own admission, is highly intolerant of disturbing sounds, I think it's kind of self-evident why it's a problem, but to give you a more objective answer, I'll say that there's a large body of evidence that chronic exposure to noise pollution causes or contributes to a wide range of health issues, from the less obvious, like heart disease and diabetes, to the more obvious, like hearing loss. And then there's, sleep disturbance and stress are two big ones as well, which are, bad enough in and of themselves, but in addition, there's kind of a cascade of health and well-being issues that arise from them, like reduced work productivity, reduced decision-making ability in children, impaired learning ability, and so forth. So noise can have pretty immediate negative consequences in people's lives, but it can also be a compounding condition that worsens other existing health vulnerabilities.
Gotcha. So it's definitely kind of public health issue then, is what you're saying.
I would say definitely, and it's often characterized as a public health issue and an environmental issue. And in addition to affecting people negatively, it also affects wildlife negatively. There's a whole separate and large body of research into that as well.
Gotcha. So a multifaceted issue then.
Yes, I would say
so. Yeah. So how did you kind of first get involved in this? What drew you to, noise and noise pollution? I guess partially, you said you yourself are, pretty sensitive to noise. Is that maybe what inspired you to go out and kind of get involved in this area?
It's a little more pragmatic. After college, you mentioned, I've worn a lot of hats professionally in my life. So after college, I worked in other fields, but it had always been my intention to get a graduate science degree, at least a master's, if not a PhD. So there came a point in my work life when I really wanted a change in direction, and I had an opportunity that I sought out and found to go to grad school and get a master's in acoustics affordably, with the intention of working in the consulting field. So I took that opportunity when it arose. And it was kind of a natural for me because I had a background early on in my education in physics and math and the audio engineering, for instance. So it was a pretty natural fit.
Gotcha. And so as an acoustician, you deal a lot with noise pollution ordinances, right? Could you tell us a little bit about, how you might, look at a noise pollution ordinance in your profession, and really what is the role of these documents in this kind of realm of noise pollution?
I guess I did actually want to discuss what the purpose of a local noise ordinance is, because I think it's often not well understood. Noise ordinances are not intended to address every type of noise that might occur in someone's life. So, for example, they don't address noise in the workplace. That's OSHA, occupational safety and health. They don't address commercial airplane and airport noise. That's FAA. And likewise, they don't address noise from railroads and highways and so forth. Local noise ordinances are really meant to deal primarily with property to property types of noise, conflicts between the use of two or more nearby properties held by different owners. However, that still covers a lot of ground, everything from the 24/7, 365 noise of mechanical equipment serving an industrial facility owned by a giant corporation near a residential zone, to the transient kinds of occurrences of noise such as leaf blowers and noisy parties. So, those are wildly different kinds of noise sources, occurring over different time periods, and yet noise ordinances are intended to deal with all of those. Now, just to elaborate maybe a little on the role of acousticians and how we use noise ordinances, I would say that acousticians rarely get involved in complaints involving things like loud parties. It's not realistic, it's expensive, and so forth. More commonly, we're called in to evaluate development projects or things that have been built and now they're making too much noise and they weren't supposed to.
Gotcha,
So, those kinds of jobs generally require that we go measure something or predict something, one or the other. So if we have to go out and take measurements, we have to verify what ultimately we are expected to report to the local authority. So there's a lot of it. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it is actually a lot of information that we need to know in order to take the correct measurements the correct way to give local authorities what they are expecting to get from us. The noise ordinance has to supply all of that. It has to tell us, how to set up our sound level meters, where to measure, what kind of an analysis we're supposed to do with the raw data, because you don't just report raw data, you have to analyze it back in your office. And often we have to look to zoning regulations as well to determine what zones properties are in and understand what standards apply in that particular instance. So it's complicated, and there's really a lot of information that we need to get from local noise ordinances. Generally speaking, the more detailed a noise ordinance is, the better in terms of acousticians being able to do their jobs well.
So, say a town kind of asks you to go out and take some measurements for a certain loud source, right? You would then look at the noise ordinance for that town, which is basically what that town, how that town regulates noise, and use that as kind of a guideline, right, to take your measurements. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, absolutely. The noise ordinance really is just kind of the law for us that we're constantly referring back to for any question that arises concerning what we measure, what kind of an analysis we do, what the source of the noise, the standard that the source of the noise has to meet. So everything really. With a little bit of contribution from like zoning regulations or sometimes building codes. But basically that noise ordinance is what we're looking to for a lot of information. Yeah.
Now, are there towns out there that don't have a noise ordinance? And if so, do you look towards the state? What goes on then?
Well, in Connecticut, there are many, many towns. The majority of towns don't seem to have any kind of a noise ordinance on the books. The state does have a detailed set of DEP, now DEEP regulations concerning noise. Those were first written back in the 1980s, I believe. And they're actually a pretty good set of regulations. Because I've had the opportunity to work on projects in multiple regions and multiple states, I think I've gotten a pretty decent idea of the range of both local and state regulations that exist with respect to noise. Connecticut's state regulations are really quite good. I think that they are most likely modeled on the EPA's model noise regulation from the 1970s. I've never been able to verify that, but there's such a similarity between them that I think that's most likely to be true. They're detailed, they're pretty comprehensive, they could be even better. The problem with the state regulations is that the state does not actually enforce them. Oh. And towns are not in a good position to enforce them, even if they use them as their standard. So that's where the biggest hole is in the noise regulation and enforcement landscape in Connecticut.
Why do you think that is, that we have a lot of these, some towns have noise ordinances in the books, like you just said, DEEP has this state regulation on the books that's pretty good, but yet, there's a lot, like you said, there's a lot of holes in enforcement. So, why do you think that is? Like, is there, an expense to the enforcement, or, do some of these towns feel like just having them on the books is adequate? Like, what would you speculate as to why, there's so many gaps in enforcement with some of these noise pollution ordinances and regulations?
Sure. I think that there's a history to that that's not just a history in Connecticut, but a history nationwide. We seem, as a country, I think we seem to go through periods where we are more inclined to regulate things and then more inclined to deregulate things. Right now, we're in more of a deregulatory environment. In the 1970s, that was a period when the EPA was created. There was a very growing awareness of all kinds of pollution, air pollution, water pollution, noise pollution, which at the time was very much seen as a kind of air pollution and actually was initially dealt with under the Clean Air Act. And so that was a time when, it was a kind of a more pro-regulatory decade. Then we get to the 80s, and that was a more deregulatory decade. That's when the EPA's Office of Noise Control and Abatement, I believe it was called, was defunded. And so its activities then got pushed to the states. And that was kind of part of a much broader deregulatory sentiment at that time, where a lot of obligations were given over to the states. Unfortunately, the states were not given resources to carry out those functions. Then in Connecticut, at least, I can say that for about a decade, from the early 80s to the early 90s, and to Connecticut's credit, by the way, Connecticut really picked up the mantle that the EPA dropped for about a decade. The DEP, that's when those regulations the state regulations that I referred to earlier were written. They're really pretty good, as I said, pretty strong.
And they once had a Office of Noise Control themselves, right? DEEP, didn't they?
They did. Now, I've never been able to ascertain how much enforcement they actually did, or how that ceased long before I entered the field of acoustics. I had no personal experience with it, and I haven't thus far been able to find anyone who did. I'm really curious about that, but that was decades ago, so there's a long time lag now. But then, I think probably for fiscal reasons, the same deregulatory cycle repeated itself. After about a decade, the Connecticut state legislature defunded DEEP's noise control activities and pushed them to the local towns and cities. And again, mirroring what had happened with the federal government's, defunding, they didn't give local municipalities the staff, the training, the equipment to carry out those functions. And that's where we're at today.
Gotcha. So 70s, herald of modern environmental movement, noise is thought of as one of the pollution we need to target. So EPA comes out with something, but then that goes away, gets pushed down to the state. So the state comes up with something deep through DEEP. Then that goes away, that gets pushed down to the local level, and that's now where we're at today. We end up with kind of a patchwork of noise ordinances that vary by town. Some towns don't even have them. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's totally accurate. And you would, in your original question too, you also referred to the cost of enforcing noise regulations, and it is considerable. And I think that is really the main reason why you don't find great enforcement at the local level. In fact, when you talk to cities and towns, and I definitely have done this, there is just a mantra that you'll hear over and over again, and it is, we don't have the staff, we don't have the equipment, we don't have the training, and it's too expensive. So my personal feeling is that without, regional cost sharing to conduct these functions, it's really not reasonable to expect local municipalities to try to do this. The equipment is expensive. It has to be maintained and recalibrated at a laboratory on an annual basis. There are lots and lots of expenses associated with having good equipment. And then you have to have the staff who understand how to use it. There's a common misconception that if you go to take a measurement of noise, that is kind of one thing. There's a kind of noise measurement that acousticians will take. there are many, many ways that you might measure sound depending on what the noise source is. And yes, all kinds of factors you have to take into play. So that's why you really do have to have staff who understand what they're doing and how to take the appropriate measurements, be able to explain why they did it the way they did it, and have a really good understanding of the equipment that they have. So it's totally understandable to me why, say, zoning enforcement officers or police officers really most of the time, should not be doing that kind of work. It's just not their wheelhouse.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you can see why it might be hard for towns to kind of play into, the enforcement of some of these the noise ordinances, and especially smaller towns too, with smaller capacity. You mentioned though that perhaps there's some opportunity, or that perhaps it might be better to address this at a regional level. Like, do you see, an opportunity for some, in Connecticut, of course, we have our Council of Governments instead of counties. Do you kind of see like a window of opportunity for maybe the COGs, if you will, to step in and maybe help out with this issue?
Well, I hope that there is, let's put it that way, but I can't speak for the COGs, obviously. I don't know whether that's a role that they can play. I know that in Connecticut, we also have public health districts. And obviously their purview is already public health. And earlier we touched on the fact that one of the ways you can look at noise pollution is as a public health issue. So maybe public health districts would be a good way to approach this. I'm not really sure yet. And I think with the white paper that we're working on, that I know you'll be discussing with Michael Towle a little bit later, I think that's one of the questions we may be looking at. So I certainly can't answer that on my own, but an effective way, for local municipalities to be able to do this work.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We'll hear more from the Council of Government perspective later. I guess my last question to you, Andy, is, what would you want to see in kind of the ideal noise pollution ordinance? How do you find that balance between something that's practical for a municipality to enforce, but yet also, goes far enough to protect public wellness, but then it doesn't inhibit certain activities? What would your dream noise ordinance look like, I guess?
I mentioned earlier that in the 1970s, the EPA actually did develop a model noise ordinance, and that I suspect our state regulations were taken pretty directly from that model noise ordinance of the EPA. Earlier, I also mentioned, that noise ordinances are intended to deal with virtually all kinds of property-to-property noise conflicts. I'm not actually sold on the idea that a local noise ordinance should attempt to address all those types of noise, but under the system we currently have, there is an expectation that that is what a noise ordinance will do. So maybe there's a smarter way to regulate noise, with local regulation of some things, state regulation of others. I'm not sure. That's a question that I think should be explored. But given the system we have, where a local noise ordinance has to address all those things, well, because it has to address all those things, it really does need to be extensive and detailed enough to predict all the kinds of noise generating activities that may cause conflicts between property owners. If a noise ordinance doesn't do that, it's really not that useful, at least not to an acoustician, because it doesn't tell us what to do. I want to mention, by way of background, that Connecticut, I think, is the fourth most densely populated state in the United States. And with higher population density comes much greater potential for conflicting use of properties, including but not limited to noise. So in a state like Connecticut, I would say that effective noise ordinances are even more important than in many other states. But again, looking at noise ordinances and speaking as an acoustician, the noise ordinance really does have to tell me everything I need to know to do my job. So it's going to, which is ultimately evaluating the compliance or non-compliance of some noise source. right? It would tell me, it's going to tell me what kind of a measurement I need to capture, where I need to take measurements. It's going to tell me what the standard is that the noise source has to meet. It has to provide for contingencies like ambient noise levels that may already exceed some stated maximum desirable allowable noise level goal. It has to tell me what the local authorities want me to report to them so I can be sure to capture the correct data. That gets back to what I was saying earlier about there not being just one kind of noise measurement, but many kinds of noise measurements. So there really is a tremendous amount of information that we rely on a local noise ordinance for. An ideal noise ordinance would provide us with all of that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So detailed enough to, give you a really solid set of instructions as an acoustician, but not so specific that it doesn't capture for certain scenarios of sound emitting entities and such, right? Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Amy. That was super insightful. And we'll return to our program in more in just a moment. You've been listening to The Impact, a Sustainable CT podcast. If you're not yet a subscriber to Actions and Impact, the Sustainable CT newsletter, you could be missing out on some very important information to you, your organization, and your town. So do yourself a favor and subscribe today. And you can do that where? Well, at sustainableCT.org, of course. And while you're out there tripping the web, don't forget to join us on Facebook for some fun and interesting stuff. Come on, be our friend, won't you? At facebook.com/sustainableCT. And yes, of course, we're linked in. Search for Sustainable CT in your LinkedIn page, and you'll find us right there being all linked in and media social. And for our municipal listeners out there, especially those seeking certification or climate leader designation during our fall certification review period, don't forget that the deadline for fall certification is August 19th, just days away. Might still be the dog days of summer in your universe, but it's final certification time for us. All submissions are due by Tuesday, August 19th at noon. Need help? Have questions? Contact us at info@sustainablect.org. You got this. Okay, let's get back to the program. We are now going to hear from a new guest for this half of the episode. We are very lucky to have Mike Towle from the Western Connecticut Council of Governments, known as WestCOG. Mike has earned a bachelor's in environmental science from UMass Lowell and a master's in GIS from Clark University. He's been at multiple planning agencies and now works on regional services, environmental planning, and public safety as the deputy director of WestCOG. Thanks for joining us today, Mike.
Thanks, John Henry. I appreciate the intro, and I'm happy to be here.
Could you tell us just a brief intro about, the Western Connecticut Council of Governments, the function of COGS in Connecticut, just in case anyone's not familiar?
Yeah, happy to. And there probably are a lot of people who are not familiar with the councils of governments or the COGS in the state of Connecticut. And that's a lot because the COGS are government entities that serve elected officials. So we work directly with chief elected officials, call them CEOs, mayors, first selectmen, and we have a monthly meeting where we meet with these CEOs and find out what regional initiatives they want us to pursue. This could be services or types of projects. Very often it's related to transportation projects. But because of that CEO-facing effort that we do, we don't really interact too often with the public, and this is why we're not too well known across the state.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's kind of a unique situation, right? Because most states have county government. In Connecticut, we don't. And a lot of people don't know that because we still kind of refer to the counties like for geographical purposes, right? But so, gotcha. Council of Governments, and the council being, the towns that make up your region, right? So the COGS are essentially the regional players, I guess, in Connecticut. And so that goes back into, my discussion with Amy earlier. She was talking about, sometimes when it comes to addressing noise pollution, it can be a little bit difficult at the municipal level, but perhaps there's an angle or an opportunity for COGs to maybe play a role at the regional level. So I'm curious, like, what have you seen at the COG, at the regional level regarding noise pollution? Have you guys gotten complaints? Like, are you thinking about, addressing this issue?
Lot to unpack there. So right off the bat, the COGs, you're right that the COGs are similar to counties. And it's a good way to think about it because both deal with regional issues.
Yeah.
And if there is a regional solution that the towns want to put forward, the COG can serve as an entity to pursue that solution. So this can be as extreme as if the towns wanted like a regional police department. They don't want this, but that's just an example. We are currently unable to do some kind of resource regionally by state statute. So we're able to go and put those things forward. We just need, again, the
towns
approval.
To be on board.
That's right. They're the ones with all the power to influence what gets generated. So if they wanted to push forward some type of regional noise pollution service where we are either administering or trying to enforce, that's something that could be possible, but it currently is not anything we're looking to provide. We are currently kind of well established to do planning work and research and studies and inform and educate. And that's typically the work we do as the COG. And so that's what we're currently working on right now to address noise pollution. We're researching, and that's what got us started with Sustainable CT.
Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit more about that research? I understand that you're working with the Sustainable CT Fellows on a noise pollution project. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about the project, what inspired it and what are the goals?
Yeah, happy to. So each summer, the COGs receive Sustainable CT Fellows to connect them with the resources that the COGs have so the fellows can go and do their extensive work for Sustainable CT and outreach with the towns. So that's great. And then on top of that, we try to put together an annual project that the Sustainable CT Fellows can work on. And I've just been butting with ideas a lot each year. And this year we pitched a noise pollution inventory project where the fellows would go and look at each noise ordinance across Connecticut and basically create an inventory of that. So a database, what types of regulations does it include in details, right? So that was a good fit. Why did we do this? Because we had numerous issues brought up by elected officials that come to and they speak regularly with our executive director. He plugs in with them a lot. And so common complaints might be about, what are the air blowers? Like leaf blowers. Thank you. That's very common complaint from the public. And then there was also a big concern about quiet zones. And WestCOG did this full quiet zone study about trains coming through and the noise from the horns or the rumble from the trains at any given hour. They're required to do a certain amount of signaling and noise response to alert people that are on the tracks.
Reasons, right? Yeah.
Yep. So that created some challenges for people who lived in the area, especially if it started to become more intense or more frequent. So they were looking up solutions on how do you address that, what are the costs to do that, and present it to the communities to look into it. So then we started realizing, wow, there isn't a lot of information or ordinances on the books for a lot of towns.
Yeah.
What's going on here? So now we're just investigating because it's kind of an interesting topic. And is there a way we can provide the best practices for our towns, recommendations or guidance for them to create noise ordinances? And there are towns updating their noise ordinances right now. And so they're very much looking forward to what we find in this study and are looking for recommendations.
So the leaf blowers and the trains were kind of the gateway into realizing, wow, like there's, a lot of towns out there that don't really have a lot on the books in terms of, regulating excessive noise, right?
That's right. That was kind of making it a hot topic. It just kept coming up.
Yeah.
And then we were contacted by a member of the public, Amy Ziffer, who you just spoke with.
Wow.
And that really just set us forward. She, being an acoustician, really knowing the topic, we said, wow, we can make this into a real project. And so with the public engagement at that level, with Sustainable CT Fellows at the ready, and with our planning experience, we said, let's go for it. And so we're working on this study now.
Fantastic. Well, those fellows sound really great, by the way.
They are great. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So I'm curious, how's the project going? What are, obviously it's not done yet, but, are there any major trends that are popping up? And what do we really see as the next steps for this project? Are we hoping perhaps that towns can look at this inventory and maybe use it to generate their own noise ordinances? Or, what's kind of the future of the project look like?
Sure. So I'll say right off the bat, the project is going very smoothly. We have 11 fellows working on the project. They divvied up the state across amongst all of them, so it really broke up the work. We initially pitched this project to be done with ChatGPT and using AI tools, and everybody rolled their eyes at us. And we said, oh, but it could save so much time. We did a test run, and it generated a ton of errors. And then we thought, we could probably do this better and faster using the fellows, just going through it manually. And we created a very structured rubric system. And I am so impressed with how fast and how effectively they all worked on this noise inventory project. And so we would have regular meetings with Amy and myself, and we would answer questions that came up about what was coming in the data. You asked what we observed. There's just so much differences and changes between how a town will address or handle noise ordinances. Very common would be the lack of detail. That's what we would see. That was pretty common. I got a kick out of there'd be a noise ordinance. There's one on the books about peddlers, and it was no, peddlers cannot sell things at a certain hour, and that was it.
Really?
I just love that example. That was all they cared about for noise ordinances was peddlers. So
as long as the peddlers aren't being too loud, we're okay.
That's right. So the inventory, everything's on schedule, and I'm also very proud. We avoided scope creep, and I think a lot to do with the fellows themselves. So we did not let this project balloon. We kept it tight, very much on ordinances only, because we could have looked at zoning, we could have done surveys.
Is a whole other aspect, right?
It sure is, and it's also very complicated too, whole can of worms. So he kept to ordinances, and what we're making right now, I believe, is a very high quality inventory product of these ordinances, which puts us in great shape for our next steps in this project, the document, the report.
That's awesome. And now in terms of, moving forward, where do you envision that this inventory will end up or be used for?
The noise pollution report, we hope, will identify where the towns currently are for their noise ordinances, give them an idea of what their neighbors are doing. And in Connecticut, the municipalities like to do as their neighbors are or find out what their neighbors are up to. But they also want to utilize best practices, ways to serve their communities in more effective and efficient ways. And this report, we hope to provide these types of best practices and recommendations for the municipalities to utilize. So that's kind of the intent and how we see it being used moving forward.
That's awesome. So this could essentially kind of be like a toolkit or a big resource for municipalities looking to address this issue.
That's right. Yep.
So, what else is there anything else really being done, in this field? Are we breaking new ground here, or are there other kind of major stakeholders that are interested or talking about this?
I will say that we are breaking ground. This is an issue that is not widely discussed in full policy planning world as we have seen it. So,
gotcha, yeah.
And from my experience, this is something that seems very fresh. There is a noise pollution advocacy group or interest group that we've connected with. The name Quiet Communities, I believe, is the organization. And so this issue is common for them, talking about municipal ordinances and noise pollution. So we have connected with them. But that's all I really know about for having heard about this before.
Yeah, so exploring uncharted waters, and that makes that data, very valuable as well, I'm sure, for towns.
Yes, I think so too.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Mike. That's all we've got for today.
This was a lot of fun for me. So thanks, guys. Take
All
care.
right, see you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks again. We hope you enjoyed today's edition of The Impact, a Sustainable CT podcast. As always, this program is recorded, produced, and copyrighted by Sustainable CT. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our sponsor, the Hampshire Foundation. And thank you to our guests, Amy and Mike, as well, for everything they do to make Connecticut a better place. And thanks to everyone for taking local actions that have a statewide impact. I'm John Henry Burke. Do me a favor and have a fantastic rest of your day.